Hello everyone, I will be presenting on the topic of data-driven modeling for an indirect photoacoustic sensor, which is for carbon dioxide. So I work at Hahn-Schickard. This is one of the research institutes in Germany for specifically the state of Baden-Württemberg. I, with my colleagues, have basically worked on this paper. Here is the brief agenda. So I will give you a brief overview, what we have done, and then I'll go towards indirect photoacoustic gas sensing. Then I will present you what was the sensor assembly and the measurement setup look like. And afterwards, I will give you a brief overview about what the experiment was about and what was the setup like. And afterwards, I'll give you what machine learning models did we use, and finally, what were the studies that we conducted and what are the results for it. And finally, the conclusions and the future work. So the idea is that we develop a data-driven model for an indirect photoacoustic carbon dioxide sensor. We want to evaluate the sensor performance, also give some insights into the sensor's repeatability and the influence of external parameters basically on the sensor response. So we conducted different multiple experiments and also evaluated different test conditions. So here on the left side of the figure 1, what you see is essentially what a photoacoustic sensing looks like. So there is a gas and we basically pass some kind of radiation, generally light, to it. And the gas under observation basically goes to a higher state. And this higher state essentially then when it relaxes, then basically dissipates in terms of heat, essentially giving result to localized heating. Thereafter, this heating results in an acoustic wave because of the pressure induced. And finally, it is recorded using a microphone. So in our case, what you see in the figure 2, we have this indirect photoacoustic gas sensor, where we have this volume detector, as you see on the right side of the image. So where the gas is sealed inside essentially a set. So this is a two block setup. So we have measurement and detector volume. On the left side, what you see is basically an emitter. The gas is basically added to this. And on the right side, the detector volume is sealed. And the microphone is also on this side. So basically, when the gas is introduced on the measurement side, what happens is basically some kind of observation of gas happens. The observation of the light wave happens due to this gas. So there are two mixtures, nitrogen and carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide basically kinds of absorb it and then basically relaxes it again. And the acoustic signal for the same is given in the right side. So essentially why this setup is better is because when you have such a setup on the lower concentrations, you are able to measure better. So pros is, of course, we can measure on the low gas concentration, and the con is essentially that we require two volume setup. And here is the sensor assembly and measurement setup. So what you see on the left is basically how the whole system, the pass sensor looks like. And it is basically contains this detector volume, which contains NTC, a ceramic base plate, and photodiode, and MEMS microphone. It contains, so it is sealed under total 100% carbon dioxide, though, because we don't want any kind of dilution for the reference signal. On the right side, what you see is figure 5. What you see is basically a nitrogen and carbon dioxide gas sources that are mixed using mass flow controllers, which are fed into reference NDIR, which basically gives you an idea how much the gas concentration looks like, and which is directly fed to a pass, the photoacoustic sensor, in our case, the indirect photoacoustic sensor, which is inside a temperature chamber, which contains temperature and humidity sensors. So the idea is that we want to basically check for the first experiment on the certain concentration that whether the sensor which we produced using this photoacoustic sensor is repeatable or not. And this we do basically at 15 degrees Celsius temperature and 50% relative humidity. So also we vary the ppm, the concentration of carbon dioxide between the range 0 to 2000 ppm via gas inlet. And we use basically data from 3 runs of experiment, and 1 data set is used for validation purposes. But for the second part of the paper's experiment, what we did was basically we created a situation where we vary the environmental factors like temperature and humidity on the sensor itself. And then we determine the response of this and whether the sensor's behavior itself is repeatable for such conditions. So essentially what it means is that we vary temperature and humidity, and then we notice how the influence of this basically influences the signal which is produced by the photoacoustic sensor. So we provide essentially the temperature input between 15 degrees to 60 degrees centigrade in half an hour's time step for a 12-hour total runtime. Similarly, we go with the relative humidity between 50 to 90%, and through a 12-hour runtime, again varying between 30 minutes each. So this is what the filter response essentially looks like. These are the humidity, voltage, and the temperature signal. So for different kind of experiments. So these are for experiment where we vary temperature and humidity terms. So for the machine learning model, we use two kinds of machine learning regression models. So one is the tree-based regression, so something like gradient boost regression, random forest regressor. Then also we use a linear regularized regression models, for example, a linear regressor and a lasso regressor. The metrics we chose to use was R2 score and normalized mean square error. So now I come to the machine learning studies. There are essentially two studies. So first study concentrates on basically determining whether the photoacoustic sensor is giving us a repeatable signal most of the times, and for this we create a specific condition, and based on this we basically try to recreate this signal again, and then by this we verify whether the sensor is giving us the repeatable behavior. And in the second study we essentially do the same, but this time we use the same setup, but we vary the temperature and humidity response. And then basically we also do it at constant ppms, and then we want to see whether the temperature and humidity influence is also repeatable for the sensor signal. So here is the result for the experiment one. What you see on the right side is essentially the voltage versus concentration or the voltage versus the carbon dioxide concentration in terms of ppm. And as you can see, the machine learning algorithm is basically giving us decent results. So it is able to basically reproduce what it has already seen. And also it tells us that the sensor signal, which it already has seen, has consistent behavior. And on the left side, what you see is basically the algorithms, which resulted in the most R2 score and correspondingly the normalized mean square error. So the cat boost regressor was basically the top performing algorithm. And now I come to the experiment two. So to give you further insight, we conducted like two kind of variations of the experiment two. First is we input temperature and humidity change as this input. So that essentially means that we give this raw change. No feature engineering is basically done except for the normalization. On the right, what you are observing is that we can basically recreate the change in voltage which is being induced, though it is a little bit spiky. And so what you see on the left is basically the algorithm which results in the most, let's say, R2 score and correspondingly the least normalized mean square error. So basically we get a very good R2 score of 0.937, but for the next experiment, we ahead with a different kind of setup. So we now give explicit values of temperature and humidity as input. So what that means is that for this 3600 time window, which we are choosing to observe the signal, we basically feed in at the time is equal to T0, basically the temperature it had, and after 3600 seconds, for example, what was the temperature at the end, and similarly for humidity. So of course, this window is shifting every single step of the sample. So this is what I was explaining to you. So basically in this setup, basically we are feeding in temperature and humidity as an individual feature at the difference of time sample. So what you notice is that the signal which we have produced is basically very similar to the actual recorded signal. So change in voltage is essentially very similar to how it looks like with the time space which we are seeing. And on the left side, we have XCP regressor, which comes at the top with the higher R2 score. That essentially means that if we expect the let's say the values basically to be very consistent. What I mean by that is the change, just by looking at the change, we should be able to predict, but we can take into account the non-linearities when we give explicit values. So the feature engineering part becomes much more important. So as I told you, that R2 score is highest for the XGB regressor, with the normalized mean square being the least. And for the conclusion, essentially that we demonstrate that indirect photoacoustic sensor is basically very repeatable for this particular 0 to 2000 ppm range for this particularly first experiment. And then for the second experiment, we get a R2 score of 0.948, which is very good, because it takes time for the gas to basically observe all these changes and to really reflect it. And also experiment to demonstrate the importance of feature engineering. For the future research, there is significant potential for further refining of machine learning models. We can do different kinds of hyperparameter search. We can also take the learnings which we have from this and basically add it to the further design. And yeah, we can also integrate into other kind of techniques. Thank you.